falls into water, because they dragged her down to the creek. In death, she wore her blue broadcloth skirt. Though frost blanketed the grass, she cooled her feet in the spring. Because I turned the log with my foot, her slippers floated downstream into the dam. Because after the thaw, the hunters discovered her body. Because she lived without our mother. Because she had inherited head rights for oil beneath the land. She was carrying his offspring. The sheriff disguised her death as whiskey poisoning, because when he carved her body up, he saw the bullet hole in her skull. Because when she was murdered, the leg clutchers bloomed, but then froze under the weight of frost. During Zaga Zika Setha, the killer of the flower's moon, I will wade across the river of the blackfish, the otter, the beaver. I will climb the bank where the willow never dies. Thank you so much. So this next poem is for all the cat lovers in the audience. We adopted our cat Lily in Pawhuska in 2005. Our family was staying in a B&B, which had formerly been owned by the Big Hearts, my mother's grandmother's family. Alexandra, where are you? My daughter's somewhere. Oh, there she is. Okay, so she figures in this next poem. My daughter, Alexandra Brainerd. Pray. If my daughter observes the paperback splayed on the floor beside the barricade of laundry hampers, wicker baskets, pillows stuffing the gaps, she will discern I was the one who hurled the book into the jaws of 4 a.m., protective of my shrinking threshold, confounded by feline affection, attempting to silence the yowling cat during the hours when sleep escapes, because his sense of self is fierce, because he cudgels our bedroom door, because deep down I love a dog. How throughout each day the cat's paws battle beneath the study door, how afterwards he leaps to the armchair beside the desk, green eyes ablaze, long whiskers twitching, striped, fluffed up tail thumping, full-bellied white heaving. Oh, tiger lily of Pawhuska, orphaned barn kitten who adopted our young daughter the day we buried deep my father's ashes, do not betray my confidence. Don't let our daughter know I threw the William Blake against the floor to frighten you away, to stop you clawing into the dark thicket of night before the birds, your prey, catch fire. Thank you so much. I will now read a couple of poems from my latest book, The Nightlife. In The Nightlife, I try to explore the drama between the life lived and the life imagined. So as you heard, my father passed away. We buried his ashes in the Fairfax Cemetery back in 2005. My parents were madly in love with each other, and it was very difficult for my mother to come to terms with my father's passing. And sadly, my mother slipped into dementia after Dad died, and she suffered from the disease for many years. One other thing I need to let you know about this next poem is that my mother originated the role of Eurydice in Balanchine's ballet Orpheus. So I wrote this poem in an attempt to come to terms with my mother's dementia. My mother descends. After he died, she slipped away, visiting her husband, my father, every night in the underworld. At dinner, she hides spoons inside her sleeves. After sunset, she crosses the river Styx, braving storm-torn waves. Rehearsing death, she lies in bed for 12-hour stints. The skiff, so fragile, shakes when she recovers her balance. When she descends to bring him back, clouds skim her eyes. She cannot see, catching only glints of his silver hair. There's never enough cutlery for Charon. Cerberus snarls hot. What she wouldn't give to convince Hades. Awake at sunrise, her limbs heavy, ache from the labor. She is weary and observes silence with the living. So both of my parents are now buried. Thank you. Both of my parents are now buried in the graveyard below my mother's childhood home in Fairfax. And this poem is about their graves. I'm kind of fascinated by graves. You'll hear some more grave poems in a little bit. Parents at rest. Excuse me. How in the afternoon, after performing chores in sync, grocery shopping, his cooking, her cleaning up, they would lie on the angled couch, toe to toe, his side, hers, books in hand, his biographies, her murder mysteries, listening to Beethoven. He'd nod off while she read to the rhythm of his breath. Outside the open windows, waves thumped on stony beach, seagulls buffeting wind. The houses of their birth, both yellow brick, now crumbled, one perched hilltop above pasture, the other prairie school city house with sunken garden. How he waited for her these many years in the graveyard below her childhood home, where now they sleep together beneath the rhapsody of Meadow Sweet. So I'm going to switch now to new poems. So these are poems from my new manuscript. I'm just going to try to organize myself a sec, sorry. Hang on one second. I think this will work. Hope everybody's doing okay out there. Okay, here we go, I got it. Sorry about this, guys. Okay. There we go. Anyway, so these are poems from my new manuscript. And the first is a mirror poem. The photographer and filmmaker Kelly Mashburn. Kelly, are you out here? Is she out here somewhere? Maybe she is, I just can't see her. Created a haunting triptych with mirror photographs flanking this poem. It was exhibited at the Osage Nation Museum Creativity 2020 exhibit. Kelly has now created a short film of Distant, which will be featured next week in the UCLA Native Film Festival, and we will both be there to present the work. So this poem arrived as a dream before Chicago shut down for the pandemic. It's called Distant, and what I mean by mirror poem, you may notice I like to write in forms. So the first line mirrors the last line, the second line mirrors the second to last line, etc. Distant. In dreams, I walk through crowds, brushing arms, knocking elbows, skin to skin, hands are bare. Crocuses congregate in beds along sidewalks. Unlatching city gates, I breathe each stranger's breath as if a new cut bloom, unafraid of anyone. I walk through every crowd, not shunned by anyone, each scent a new cut bloom. I breathe each stranger's breath, unlatching city gates. In beds along sidewalks, crocuses congregate. So I've been writing a long, I've been writing a long poem called Heritage of the Blood Wolf Moon, and the sequence is a bracelet of poems where the last line of the first poem becomes the first line of the second, and the poems float across the page in hanging indent stanzas. So I'm going to read you several poems from the manuscript. I'm going to be skipping around, and I'm going to start out with number 6. Heritage of the Blood Wolf Moon, number 6. Because of their last name, the sisters believed they owned the town. Tall chief spelled out on the marquee, the gem of Fairfax, built by their father. That theater, a shell, as long as I can recall, a shell emptied from inside without nacre or muscle. Ghosts of dressing rooms beneath the sweep of stage, the place where vaudevillians between the acts swapped out their costumes. Last spring's tornado tore up the town, now an abandoned movie set, businesses boarded up, except the dollar store at the end of Main. I step across glass like cracked ice, outside the blown-out storefronts, the beams of the theater's roof, newly refurbished, blasted away. As if trying to rewrite an ending, we climb the hill to excavate the terracotta house, my mother's childhood home. You'll see that some themes going on today. 7. Thank you. My mother's childhood home, where the driveway is overgrown with weeds, surrounded by upstart trees, sycamores and oaks, tunneling uphill toward the brick edifice. A carrion beetle, bright orange and black, scuttles across the path. The endangered burying beetle digs a grave, mummifies its prey, the voles and snakes, then returns to the tomb to mate and raise its young. If discovered on a construction site in Oklahoma, all drilling terminates. A shred of white curtain in an upstairs window, I imagine my grandmother still alive inside the ruined house. My grandmother's fudge cools on the wooden kitchen table downstairs. In the basement, a rattler twines inside the dryer. I cut cattle on quarter horses, pressing my 12-year-old knees into leather, swerving in sync with the herd. Riding back to the barn, the horse is spooked. A garter snake ripples beneath a plot of leaves. Thank you. Thanks also to the Osage Nation for, I read an article about the carrion beetle, and that helped inspire that poem. And we visited the house. This was written also after the time of the tornado in Fairfax. So I wrote this back in 2019. Okay, I'm skipping to number 10. And this poem was featured in the Library of Congress. Joy Harjo did Living Nations, Living Words, where she chose different Native Americans across the country and featured their work, and she created a map for the Library of Congress, and you can go there and click it, and you can hear the poets reading the poems, you can see the poems, and there's also an explanation about the poems on the map. Number 10. The year my mother was born in Fairfax, Oklahoma, white men were marrying Osage women and killing them for their head rights. My mother was born a year after the Indian Citizenship Act was passed, Indians tied to the U.S. for or against their wills. 3 years before her birth, her half-sister, baby Ruth's grave was dynamited with nitroglycerin by outlaws scavenging for diamonds and gold buried inside the casket. In the Tall Chief plot, I wander through family history, the marble monuments, angelic statues, measuring each step on grass, memorizing photographs. This one of a striking beauty, my great-grandmother, Eliza Big Heart Tall Chief, 1870 to 1962, surviving her husband by 50 years. The widow, the adored grandmother of my mother, Eliza. Only now do I see my name a permutation of hers. At home, oops, it's going on a little bit longer. At home in Chicago, every day I pass family photographs framed on walls. My great-grandfather's oval sepia portrait of his boyish face replicated on the headstone. Instead of the young bride, here is Eliza, a tribal elder, wrapped in a multicolored blanket, standing outside her front porch. A photo taken after all those years she outlived him. Okay, that's the end. Thank you. So one more poem from this long sequence of poems, and then I'm going to bring a special guest onto stage for my last 2 poems. So this one is about a memory of my mother dancing Swan Lake. My mother was celebrated as a Google Doodle last November, and they included this poem on the website. And the filmmaker also created a special film of me reading the poem as you see my mother dancing. It's very moving. You can Google, I think, Elise Paschen, YouTube, Swan Queen. Across a lake, my mother floated, a swan, spellbound by day, transformed back to human at night. As a child, with every shift of vibrato, I could predict the enchantment. Let me tell you about a procession of swans, the swish of waves luring beyond the stage. After encores, my mother's face shone when she saw my eagerness curtained behind the wings, her only child, a fairy tale made flesh, her moonlit face encompassed by ivory swan feathers. Thank you so much. So 2 final poems. I'd like to invite Christopher Cote to join me on the stage, please. Very bright. I knew Christopher's grandfather and grandmother, and I was so delighted that we've been collaborating together. And I didn't know about Charles Redcorn and Jerry Redcorn until just a couple of days ago when we first met. Catherine Redcorn. Oh, sorry, yes, Catherine Redcorn is Christopher's grandmother. Oh, sorry, Catherine Redcorn. I'm so sorry, Christopher. You say who your grandparents are.
Yeah, I come from the Redcorn family. Catherine Redcorn is my grandmother. Many people have known her as being the director for the Osage Nation Museum for, I think it was 15, 17 years, and then she retired. And now my Aunt Marla is the director over there, and she's done really great things there. So just a little bit about my family. I come from the Redcorn family.
And I also worked with Catherine quite a long time ago, so Catherine's grandson. So I became intrigued with Carolyn Quintero's Osage Dictionary, and I wrote several poems inspired by her translations. During this time, I also was working with the U.S. Mint on the design of the quarter, which will feature my mother, Maria Tallchief, in 2023. We asked Chad Renfro to serve as the consultant from the Osage Nation, and Chad and the Osage Nation Language Department advised that the U.S. Mint represent my mother's name in Osage orthography. Thanks, Chad, if you're out here. Thanks to the Osage Nation Language Department for all your work and help. As a result, I also incorporated Osage orthography into these poems, thanks to the translations of Christopher Cote of the Osage Nation Language Department. So we're going to read 2 last poems. Christopher will read the Osage, and I will read the poem in English.
Ikuspa, Skope, Mainka, Dote, Hoe, Wasetahu, Gedache, Du, Dastue, Michaska, Long Hota, He, Ie, Distowe, Mi Ade Etaha, Jaja, Reje, Nita.
Stationary. Sign with a thumbprint deep in this earth. The throat like a waterfall rumbles. A sycamore's shadow swallows the swan. We thunder while our teeth talk. Take off a garment. At sundown, leaf-like layers stipple the flooding water.